think we can say that a lot of questions are raised by what Descartes' doing. One of the ones that Blackburn discusses is whether you can really know yourself. It would seem that Descartes argues pretty persuasively that you can, but has he really, at least as we've reviewed it, we haven't read the book, but has he really established that you can know yourself? Well, he has established that you cannot doubt that you are thinking, and that the fact that you are thinking implies your existence, that there must be a subject who is thinking in order for thinking to occur, and maybe that is in itself questionable, but it doesn't seem to me to be outlandish as a claim. However, knowing that I exist is different than knowing myself, and we get this analogy where Descartes himself asks, he looks at a piece of wax and he asks, whether he really knows the wax, or what does it mean for him to say that he knows the wax, and he puts it near the fire and the shape changes and all sorts of other things about it change, and he wonders, what is it that I really know? If all the qualities of the wax change, how do I know? What is it about the wax that I really know? And do I know the wax apart from all those qualities which are continually changing? And he says that he does. That he grasps the being of the wax with his intellect and understands that while its qualities change, the underlying thing remains the same. And Blackburn says, well, perhaps that's similar to our knowledge of ourselves. That is, at any one moment I am aware of either what I'm experiencing through my senses or what I am experiencing in my imagination. I don't know if I ever directly know myself. Again, our physical bodies are taken at this point not to be ourselves. They're part of the external world, and knowing what you look like is not knowing yourself. It's certainly not the self that Descartes is getting at. So there's questions about, I may know that I exist, and I think that is probably something that I can't doubt, but it seems to be quite different from knowing myself. But even if you put those questions aside, even if I do know that I exist, and I know that I'm thinking, and as Descartes would say, I do know something about myself, and that is I am essentially a thinking thing and not a body, because I can imagine existing without a body. At least that's something that I can conceive of. I cannot imagine, I cannot conceive of existing without thinking, because if I were not thinking, I could not be said to exist in any way. So Descartes says, well, that means I'm essentially a thinker. I may be other things, but I'm essentially a thinking thing, meaning that that's the most important thing. It's the definitive thing about me. But say that I do know that. Where does that really get me? I would like to think that apart from knowing myself, insofar as I do, that I also know the world, that I know things about things that are external to me, that I can make reliable claims about what there is in the world besides me. I usually consider myself a fairly small and insignificant part of the world. It would be very odd if all I knew in this world were myself, but that seems to be the problem, and Descartes certainly wants to get back there. Well, Blackburn tells us and shows us perhaps some of the weaknesses in these strategies, but two ways in which Descartes tries to sort of argue from just as pure subjective knowledge of self, or awareness of self, to this idea that we can actually know things about the world. One is the so-called clear and distinct criterion, and the other is God. And God plays a very big part in Descartes' argument. But let's look at the first thing first, the so-called clear and distinct criterion. The idea is that, okay, here's something that I do know. This is the result of my doubt, or Descartes' result of his doubt, is that he was able to find one thing that was incapable of doubt, and that was I think I am thinking, I exist. So we have one example of something that we really know, that is something as reliable knowledge. And Descartes asks himself, well, what is it about it that makes it certain? What is it about it that makes it true? Or what is it about it that accounts for why it is so undoubtedly, indubitably true? And he says, well, all I can say is that when I say it to myself, when I say these words to myself, I think, I am, that their truth exhibits itself with a clarity and distinction, that its truth pops out with clarity and distinction, and there's no vagueness, there's no questionability, there's no fuzziness about it. It just has that mark of being a clear and distinct truth. And that can serve, therefore, as a kind of criterion, while other things that I also apprehend with such clarity and distinction, they should also be true then. That is, if it's the clarity and distinction with which I apprehend the I think, I am, that makes it true, that makes it indubitably true, then other things with the same degree of clarity and distinction should also be true. So that is a very important step. We can imagine that Descartes has isolated himself, that he has argued himself down to this one piece of knowledge, I think, I am. But this clarity and distinction criterion is a way for him to climb out of that and say, well, maybe there's other things that I know with, or that I apprehend with the same clarity and distinction, and therefore I know them too. Right? So that is a very important part, and Descartes does sort of reconstruct things, not maybe the world as he knew it before, in the same degree of confidence in the same things, but he's able in a way to rebuild the world for himself by this criterion of clarity and distinction or distinctiveness. But that's maybe cheating a little bit. I mean, there's cheating in philosophy all the time, and that's what makes it so interesting. So it wouldn't be a terrible sin if Descartes was doing a little cheating. But remember, we have this evil demon who we consider to be this all-powerful, malevolent being who is intent on fooling me. That is, making me believe all sorts of things that are untrue. Why wouldn't it be within the power of this evil demon to fool me about the so-called clear and distinct criterion as well? That is, wouldn't it be in the power of the evil demon to make it appear clear and distinct to me all sorts of things which are false, which are untrue? Well, how do you get over that one? Well, this is where God comes into it, and this is why God and the existence of a benevolent God is such an important part of Descartes' argument. And to modern ears, or frankly to a modern philosophical reader, a little strange that he's bringing God in what is purely an epistemological exercise or epistemological inquiry, that is an inquiry into what we can know and how we know it. But it's absolutely crucial to Descartes. And Descartes spends a fair amount of the meditations, or puts a lot of effort in the meditations into proving the existence of God, because he needs him, because he needs to be able to say, well, I have these very, very strong apprehensions, or these very strong impressions of certain things being clear and distinct, so clear and distinct that I can't doubt them, can't doubt their truth. And how do you get over the evil demon thing? Well, you get over the evil demon thing by proving the existence of God and proving that there is a perfect being. And Blackburn goes into some criticism of Descartes' proof of the existence of God through his idea of perfection, and the idea that Descartes has this idea of perfection, and he couldn't have this idea of perfection unless it came from a perfect being. But okay, that's an attempt to prove the existence of God, which is a very difficult thing. But given that there is a God, and given that we do have these very, very strong predilections to grant certain things as being absolutely true because we grasp them with this clarity and distinctness. Descartes argues that it would be incompatible with the idea of a good, omnipotent, beneficent creator if he were deceiving us about those things. I mean, certainly we're capable of doubt, but Descartes says that to be utterly deceived, not just in the details of our beliefs about the world, but in the fundamental convictions we have about the way the world is. For instance, that there are material objects in the world. Now maybe I don't know them in particulars as much as I could, or maybe I can be deceived about particular objects, but the very existence of an external physical or material world, how could I be fooled about that unless God were intentionally deceiving me, making my faculties so faulty that they could be wrong about something like that? Descartes argues that if there is a God, and if he's a beneficent God, that there's just no way that he could fool us in that deep a level and still be a good, God as he is, right? So that's how kind of Descartes climbs out of his, let's say, epistemological hole with the aid of these, with the aid of the clear and distinct criterion, which says that if I apprehend something clearly and distinctly, and it clearly and distinctly appears to me true, then it probably is. And also this idea that I am the creation of a benevolent God, and that he would not make me, he would not have created me with such deep faults in my faculties that those things which do appear to be utterly clear and distinct turned out to be false. That just couldn't happen. Now, there's all sorts of, I think that's the basic story of Descartes' meditations, There are some problems. I want to do one more video, perhaps, and looking a little bit at some of the criticisms from Blackburn and others.